our economic management is more interested in what can help them to establish credibility again, investor confidence, and borrowing again. Now, if they're looking at that direction, this is one of the bad deals, because it's going to increase Ghana's indebtedness. And then finally, they will resume what they've been doing all along and prepare ourselves for the next IMF bailout again. Because you look at our debt to GDP, which is about, I think, 88.1%, which is very high. So we are heading towards 100. And then we have all the downgrades. So the IMF deal is good because in the short term, it will bring in some discipline. They will have to comply to get the other tranches. But it will help the CD also. And the speculators already started helping the CDs once the deal was announced. But for me, it's more short term because like you were talking from the beginning, you see the reserves that we've been mismanaging our reserves because we artificially putting dollars or hard currency into the market in order to control the CD. So the CD doesn't get to equilibrium as it should. So the CD's position is always manipulated by the Bank of Ghana. And when you do that, you are indirectly subsidizing certain type of consumptions because it encourages imports once the CD is put in the abnormal position to make it look as if it's stable. So my sense is that IMF will also, as they work with Ghana, will begin to see what caused us to get to where we are. This money, some of it definitely will be used for the budgetary support in order to, stabilize the economy in that direction. The budget deficit is very huge. The government revenue, as they're projecting, also, for me, is not something that they can accomplish. Because in an economy where businesses are not making headway, businesses are struggling, the IMF is recommending that we increase taxes and then collection efficiency. When you are even efficient in collecting taxes, but the payers cannot pay, it's a bridge to nowhere because we have very high taxes and then our business environment is too toxic, contaminated with taxes. About 15 of them, you buy petrol or any fuel for business, you have about 8 taxes or more on it, on the product. So it ends up increasing production costs. Our inflation, yes. If Bank of Ghana begin to behave as if it is trying to mob excess liquidity when excess liquidity doesn't exist, because our inflation is not money supply driven. It's basically production. That is lack of production that is causing it. So you use the wrong prescription, you use the wrong medication for wrong type of illness, it's not going to get it cured. And that is where we find ourselves now. We are heading for more difficult days. In terms of real wages, IMF will always tell you to freeze, wage increases, which means real income is going to continue to diminish. And very soon you might see a lot of our workers on the streets like it happened many years ago, because the IMF is saying you can't increase wages, but cost of living is going up. So my sense is that there is a good opportunity for IMF to control the addicted financial management team, but their addiction to borrowing is not going to just go away.
Well, first of all, the matter of inflation that you just talked about, from the very beginning, you always had an issue with the kind of reaction that the BOG, how the BOG was trying to tackle the problem by increasing the policy rates. And the BOG is now saying that actually that is working, that inflation is falling. So they'll continue to use the same tool. What do you say to that?
You see, the inflation that you see currently, it was even underestimated. Because if you do business in Ghana, you figure out that the inflation for me was higher than the 53, 54 they were projecting. And it's not driven by, like I said, money supply. So that once you control the money side of the economy, then you're going to, cause a reduction in, inflationary rate. It's not as simple as that, because there are a lot of things that we don't have control over. Importation and whatever we are doing currently, we are still importing. And the cost of borrowing, once they increase the policy rate, also increases. Because when you increase interest rates in an economy where predominantly we spend cash in Ghana, it's not like US where people spend credit. So when you increase interest rates, it disincentivizes them from buying, banking products. It disincentivizes them from borrowing. Nobody cares. When you increase the rate, the ordinary person is still spending their cash. And when they don't have enough of it, or when the economy is not able to generate enough for people, they can't patronize goods and services. So in the long term, it's going to not have significant effect. They've been doing a lot of artificial stuff, and one of it is pumping money into it, increasing interest rates. But the interest rate increment is rather jeopardizing the future of our businesses. Because cost of borrowing goes up, it has direct effect on a lot of economic activities. And in an economy where you are striving to exercise fiscal conservatism, you don't go in and interfere with your currency in that direction, because what it is that you are indirectly subsidizing consumption. Because you increase interest rates, you use your reserves to shore up your currency. That's exactly what you're doing. And it's not going to help in the short term. Speculators can help in reducing prices, or once the IMF has come to town, because the price increases are done by individual companies and individuals. So they could just say, look, we don't want to increase for now. But when they look at the economic conditions and they've not changed technically, they're going to resume increasing prices again. And then when the import bill is still high, it's going to reflect in the market. So ultimately, it's not a good idea to use interest rates to control your inflation when people are not really so much into credit. Interest rates are already very high, and some people are turned away from the banks because of the high interest rates. And people, like I said, it's a cash economy. So whether interest rate goes up or not, some people just don't care. So it doesn't really cause any changes in consumption of banking products.
Then there's the matter of the way that the Bank of Ghana applies the dollars that we acquire. Even though A lot of people disagree. In fact, yourself, you disagree. A lot of economists disagree with using your dollar reserve to shore up your currency. There's also a political cost to this government watching the currency run riot, because if it goes up, they'll remind you of the things you said before coming into power. So there's a political cost to that. So it's something that cannot be avoided. For them, they need the city to look good. Else, there'll be playbacks for them. How do you balance it to ensure that you keep a strong city and also watching the political cause of not doing anything about it?
You see, in economic management, you create a lesser problem in order to provide long-term solution. So even if they do that, and I mean, governments all over the world, they've been doing that. If you look at United States, when we had a pandemic, because the dollar is so much in demand, United States government printed about 3 trillion of their dollars. And they knew it was going to help, it was going to create inflation at some point. But they knew they could control the inflation through interest rates and others. So whilst you are doing this for short-term solutions, you need to look into the long term. Are we going to invest in agriculture? Are we going to end things like importation of tomatoes, poultry products, which are, huge in when it comes to our economic equation? So that in the short term, you try to do that and then encourage importation of capital goods. And those, that model can help to create higher production in the future. And that one can help your GDP. While the GDP goes up, it's also going to help with our position, our balance of payment position, and other things that the macroeconomic environment is going to really get better. So it's a matter of doing that in the short term is fine. When you do that to help your country's economy, cool it off, and then invest in the future. But in this case, that is not what we are doing. We just keep doing it until we run out of reserves. Currently, our reserves depleted so badly, and that has actually just destroyed the city.
You then talk about, and in fact, you've been talking about this for a while. Okay.
At some point, if we cannot do it, it's not something.
Hello? Hello? Doc?
Okay, I can hear. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. For a moment there, I lost you. I didn't get the concluding part of your remark.
Oh, okay. What I was saying was that, you can, in the short term, you can really artificially control falling. It's going to affect everything, including importation on capital items that you need to produce. So once you do that, to control the rate of CD depreciation, you can then invest in future. In the long term, you can invest in production, so that in the long term, once production goes up, it's going to affect your balance of payment position, and also help to perhaps increase your reserves, as if you are able to cause exportation. So it's a good idea to do that only if you do it in the long term. In the short term. But if you do it in the long term, it's going to cause your economy to be dependent on that model, which is not good, which can really take you to a point where you cannot keep doing it. It's not sustainable. So the best way is, even if you are doing using your reserves to shore up your currency, then you must have a plan in place to ensure that in the long term you are able to produce enough to correct the decline of your currency and not be dependent on using your reserves.
Well, you have always raised the issue of expenditure as against increases in tax revenue. Government, and in fact, if you look at the IMF program, they have leaned towards increasing what do you call it, tax revenue, and the expenditure that is targeted are wages and capital expenditure, among others, things that typically would affect the ordinary Ghanaian. Meanwhile, government size remains the same. They have kept the same number of appointees. There's not so much cut that is happening there. What do you think about that dynamic and how it will play out?
Well, IMF emphasized so much on fiscal consolidation, and that will include what we've been telling the government all along, to reduce expenditure and then increase revenue mobilization. Because the issue is that, like, IMF is in town, they will see it themselves. They'll begin to see that the government is over bloated. The government's attitude is not geared towards reducing expenditure. And I don't know why they don't want to do it, because it's one of the solutions that they can use to put our economy back on track. And this, all along, this is what the minority in parliament has been telling the government. Reduce expenditure. And even on the streets, people are talking like that. People who don't have knowledge in economics is even telling government to reduce expenditure, because we all know that's one of the biggest problems. But government doesn't want to listen. I know maybe IMF emphasizing on fiscal consolidation is going to make them begin to look in that direction, because it's very key to getting this economy back on track. It's government spending that contributed to the excessive borrowing, because government will have to continue to borrow to keep things normal.
Let me conclude then by asking you what additional measures you think is required, because the IMF does not have to tell us some of the things we need to do in the midst of these difficulties. They will be looking at other things, but government also has to be doing some things so that we can get closer to whatever objectives we have set for ourselves. What additional measures would you propose that government look at?
Well, number one, they need to look at the structure of our economy, where we export nothing and rather import everything. And that will mean that they need to invest in agriculture to ensure that we don't, our dependence on importation for things like tomatoes, poultry products, and all that are completely reversed. And also, you look at the expenditure as we've been talking about all along. The government needs to do something about expenditure. They need to invest in productive ventures, and they need to use unconventional means, do energy conservation, and that can really reduce our demand for energy, because energy is one of our nemesis. You look at cocoa board organizations, most of the SOEs are costing us than rather helping the economy. So we need to really, and that has to do with management. We need to manage some of these SOEs well, so that instead of them causing a lot of recurrent expenditure to increase, they will rather be making profits to help the economy. So it all has to do with controlling our level of waste investing in the long term to reverse some of the attitudes that we developed over the years that cause our economy to be so dependent on importation. In that sense, we wouldn't need a lot of the foreign currency that has been in high demand and is causing the depletion of our reserves. So we need a lot of things to happen, some of them unconventional, especially the energy sector. We're spending so much and we're getting little for it because there's under recovery, and also nobody is thinking of alternative sources of energy like solar. All government buildings can be put on solar, and that means that we will reduce the cost of energy in that sense. And then other type of conservations, we can look at transport sector, what we can do to reduce our dependence on oil for most of the transport activities that we undertake, and that can help significantly in the short term and in the long term in creating economic stability. The emphasis on fiscal consolidation is going to do that. The government has, you look at the government attitude, for me, I'm not very optimistic because they're all emphasizing on let's stabilize the economy and then start borrowing. That means the borrowing addiction is still there. And we need to really tackle that first before we can implement the recommendations of the IMF effectively.
You have to take their minds off the borrowing. Deal with that appetite. But so I was going to end on that note, but you made a few suggestions that raises a few questions. We know that there's a flag bearer aspirant who is going around. His whole campaign message is built on the fact that he has successfully managed the agri sector, or at least for 4 to 5 years when he was a Greek minister. He implemented what they call planting for food and jobs. He says the farmers are the ones who turn up and vote for him, where if he is given the opportunity to become flag bearer of the party. Are you suggesting that his policy failed?
Well, President Mahama is a learning person. He was a learning president. He was someone who listened to people, who listens to the experts. Before he went to IMF, he had to assemble the experts to advise him on that. And that is what you need in president. And he has learned a lot. He's handled many issues. And that has actually enriched his experience in handling some of these major issues like agriculture and then also the private sector. So my hope is that Ghanaians will really listen to the agenda that he's putting on the table. Because agriculture sector, we need to go back to Operation Feed Yourself. And I was happy when he mentioned it. It might not have the same name, but the Operation Feed Yourself model is going to help our economy restore sanity. It's going to help us to restore sanity in our economy in a significant way. So President Mahama, for me, if it is able to get the chance to implement some of the things that he has talked about all along, he can put our economy back on track. Because before 2016, there were challenges, and you could see how he was resolving them. The energy crisis, how he put a lot of emphasis on development of private sector through organizations like GIDA, using the government organizations to really propel the private sector. And that could have helped us in the long term.
So I was actually asking about
Ghanaians
Dr. Efriye Akoto. I was actually asking about Dr. Efriye Akoto. We spent billions on planting for food and jobs. We said we made significant investments in agriculture. You are now still asking for investments that facilitate export. So I'm asking whether that for you means In your assessment, the planting for food and jobs failed.
It failed completely. It didn't look anything Operation Feed Yourself. Because you see, Operation Feed Yourself, what they did, they made the farmers the center of everything. It wasn't more about money. For example, I still remember in the 70s, they would supply fertilizer to farmers in their farms. And when you produce, you have where to sell. For example, rice, you sell to the rice mills. And the rice mills were supposed to mill the rice. That creates huge employment for people. And the banks were also there, Agri Development Bank, we had Cooperative Bank, and they were all supporting farmers with loans to pay your farm workers. So in the end, it was stimulating economic growth. And if you don't look at it from that angle and just start dumping money into agriculture, you're not going to get the right outcome. You need to create the sense that the farmer is the center. He produces, there's where to sell, he needs support. There are agricultural extension officers going around advising our farmers. We are adopting new technology. We are creating projects that actually can help the youth to get into agriculture. And that will solve multiple problems. One, you get to give people income, reduce unemployment, and that can stimulate economic growth because they can now patronize goods and services, pay taxes to, help the government increase revenue mobilization. So that is the angle they should have looked at agriculture. But unfortunately, we have seen, no sanity in that area. Dr. Akusu has performed so badly because I can't really see the output of all the investments we have made in agriculture in the market. It hasn't shown in the market, and it has not reflected on the lives of ordinary people. Workers are worse off. They spend a great deal of their income on food, and an average of about 80% of workers' salaries are spent on food. This is the model America tried to avoid. They make sure that they produce enough, there's so much food. So your income, no matter what your income is, you can afford food. And when that is taken off the table, you take care of the other things. That is how you improve the quality of life of people. So these are just slogans they put in the market. But the planting for food was a big disaster. And I can't wait for a new government to come in and then replace it with a very effective agriculture program, reminiscent of the Operation Feed Yourself.
And let me conclude then by drawing attention to something. By the time former President Mahama was leaving office, Cocoa Board was in a good enough position for them to be carrying a whole road project. That was the Cocoa Roads project. By that time, there were lots of SOEs which were in electricity company of Ghana was starting to show promise in terms of even declaring profit, among others. They were trying to put VRA back on track. Where has this government failed so much so that the SOEs have become one of the major areas of concern when they inherited a situation that could have been improved upon and put these state-owned enterprises on a profitable path?
And in order, to add up, President Mahama's time, what they were trying to accomplish was to make these SOEs very independent when it comes to debt management. They wanted them to take the loans and then manage it themselves. And that model is the best because when you begin to jam up everything, take loans, and then deal with, because the SOEs are supposed to be business, and their business model must be such that they cause profits to happen and not to increase their recurrent expenditure every single day. So President Mahama did a lot of work to put them on the right and sound footing, and that should have been encouraged. But you look at the Cocoa Board. Now the Cocoa Board is a big liability. instead of being a very valuable partner in development, Galamsey has come to destroy most of the cocoa farms. So there are a whole lot of chain of activities that are destroying the SOEs. And in order to bring them back, we need to put a lot of business sense into how they operate. And the governmental attitude is very important. Because once you try to divest them, they may not serve a very useful purpose. You look at some of the organizations, President Mahama encouraged them to diversify so that once they are you look at their core business, they have other auxiliary type of businesses around that can help them to, stay on the sound footing. But this government has not encouraged that. They are more interested in the mining sector where you just go and extract, generate money, and also get some taxes, and the expatriates will take the money away. So you look at our GDP, the composition has been very unfavorable, and it continues that way because we rely on extractive industry that this government is encouraging everywhere to make sure they destroy our water bodies and make sure that whole lot of things happen that undermine the economic development of our country. So my sense is that President Mahama is a hard cake now because of some of the things he did, and he listened. That was one of the cardinal, good trait of him, because whatever people were saying, he listened and he tried to resolve the problem. He won't do so. He said, "Look, we will resolve it," and he did. And that is really even keeping our economy going now. If we had done so at this time, it would have been so terrible. But fortunately, the government doesn't have to deal with that because that problem was solved, and they could not harness it to create a vibrant private sector.
Doc, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
You're welcome.
Dr. Justice Salifu is based in the US. He's a management and organization expert. Speaking